Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of the Dairy Signal. We've been coming live to you, and if you've been taking in the podcast or the vodcast format, it is crazy to say that it has been 5 years. So regardless if this is your first time tuning in or if you're an old season pro, thank you. Thank you for helping make this possible, and truly, not only for our listeners, feeding us content of what you want to learn more on, but also to our sponsors, our national sponsors, which stand with PDPW and alongside you as fellow dairy producers and fellow Aggies, if you want to say it that way, all this time. They help make it possible, help make it approachable, because we have listeners from not only here in the Midwest, but from coast to coast and even internationally. So again, thank you to all who have helped make this possible. As we dive into today's content and really important topic and very timely here with Todd, I encourage you, if you are again listening live, to ask your questions, but also for those that are taking it in at their own time, their own leisure, by all means, these contacts, these resources are at your disposal. So if you need help approaching or asking your questions after the fact, by all means, allow us to help you get connected, or sometimes these are resources that might be available at your fingertips as well. So without further ado, let's turn it over. Again, I was hinting at it, probably not so creatively, but we have Todd Schomburg with us today. So he's one of the owners and the agronomist with Tilth Agronomy. If you have been a past listener, this is hopefully a familiar sound or a familiar voice to you, as he's been with us a couple of times. But as we dive into today's content, it's very timely. It's very spring-like, if you will. And when we're talking about kind of your crop rotations, many of you may have bought seed already, but as you think maybe if you can sneak it in this year, but maybe even to next year, let's shake up the tree. Let's shake that tree, see how we can kind of mix it up. But then Todd, tell us the why. Why are we getting to this? Why are we thinking about this in an alternative way?
Yeah, thank you, Cassie, and thanks for having me on again. I always love to talk to dairy producers about agronomy things because they're so concentrated in the barn, which is good, but we like to talk about the fields a lot too. So this is an exciting topic. We're going to talk about guarding that ground and how we can do what we can to protect the soil with a crop rotation and some of the other good positive things a crop rotation will do for these farmers too.
Absolutely. So let's dive in. I'll take your lead. I know there are some big take-home points, but I without further ado, I'll hand it off to you, but you know my style. I will ask questions.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, thank you, Cassie, and to all the dairy producers out there, this is a good time of year to even start thinking about next year already. So we got what's going to happen this spring, but some of these stuff is maybe a little bit bigger picture. And one of the things you can do is earlier this year, start thinking about what's one change I can make this spring so that I can learn from it. Maybe it's multiple changes. And most of the time, farmers call them happy little accidents when they do test plots. I'd rather not have the accident part. I'd rather do it on purpose. So one of the things you can do, I was just meeting with a grower yesterday, actually, and we talked about they have a piece of ground that very sandy, doesn't grow well. And we're thinking about changing it up, and they're going to plant actually some BMR sorghum on that field. So it not that we want to make last minute changes, but you do want to be thinking of how you can improve your farm each year and what you can do. So today we're going to talk about sort of this crop rotation idea and what it can do. And then in about the end of the presentation, since it is spring, we're going to pivot to kind of a hard pivot to what we can watch in early season, kind of in April and May, of threats that are out there and what we can do and watch out in our fields. So it's spring. We got to talk baseball. I love baseball. I grew up with baseball. That was the only sport I was sort of good enough to actually be okay at and play. And actually, my grandfather loved baseball too, so he would take, and my dad, and we enjoyed baseball. And one of the things in baseball they talk about is a pitching rotation. So we don't hear that word rotation in the sense where we're talking of cropping rotation. And one of the ones I thought of is pitchers in baseball. So usually in pitching in baseball, you have sort of a starting rotation. So you have maybe 4 or 5 pitchers that get to go out, and you got your aces, and then you got maybe some guys that are okay. I'm a huge Brewers fan, being that we're in Wisconsin. I know some of our listeners are obviously going to be other fans. And this year, early season for Brewers, we didn't look so good. Our pitching got really hammered against the Yankees and they actually like broke records against us with this new torpedo bat they had. So they just sort of destroyed our rotation that way. However, since then the rotations kind of came back and solidified. But in baseball, if you talk rotation, probably the one that comes to my mind that's been the best rotation ever is the Atlanta Braves in the 90s they had John Smoltz, they had Glavine, and they had Maddox. So they had three pitchers that just nobody wanted to face. They won a bunch of, pitching awards. They were just extremely good. And when we talk on the dairy rotation side, are probably three aces that are like that is going to be corn silage, alfalfa, and then there's kind of that third. We don't necessarily have always a third. The third sometimes is grassy, like a grass forage of some kind. Maybe it is soybeans, maybe it's wheat. But I would say in general, in our dairy rotations, we're missing that third. So we've got John Smoltz and we've got Glavine, but we don't have a Maddox. We don't have that sort of third guy that's going to win you that World Series or do really, really well. So one of the things I want, as we're talking today, growers to think about, if you do have a 2-crop rotation, I got some ideas how you can add a third crop. If you have a 4-crop, a 3-crop rotation, how you can add a fourth. If you have, depending what you have for rotation, if you're up to 5 crops, you're doing pretty well. Even 4, but say you're a little bit under that, I've got some ideas of how we can fit that other crop in there to help with soil degradation and just help change it up, get different bugs in the soil, get different roots active. All that stuff is very good. So one of the other things with baseball is usually we talked about my Brewers. Like the last couple of years, they actually had a really good rotation going in. This year, they're 18th on the sort of best of worst. And the one that everybody's talking about this year is the LA Dodgers. So they've got just an awesome rotation. So they've got Shohei Ohtani, who can pitch and bat. I mean, that's not even heard of really, that he could actually play a position field. Usually pitchers just pitch now. So as we talk to that, I'm going to have a few analogies of where these crops fit and what pitcher they are like. So to start out with some other ideas, and basically this idea of you have a 2-crop rotation or a 3-crop rotation, what can I add? So we're going to talk about soybeans. We're going to talk about wheat. We're going to talk about sorghum. We're going to talk about grass forage. And then we're going to talk about rye or triticale or some sort of small grain crop that you can plant either as a cover crop or a forage crop. And then last, we're going to have a real simple one of just adding a grass species to the mix. So not necessarily that you need to change a whole rotation with some of these. Some of these are just maybe adding something into something you already do. So the first one, and this one I'm going to call the middle reliever. So this one's kind of maybe for one thing, it's a little bit newer. So in baseball, middle relief is new. It used to be pitchers they pitched the whole game. They complete games now. I don't know when the last complete game is. They sure don't do that as much. So we got the middle relief. So not that soybeans is new, but we're going to talk about high oleic soybeans. So high oleic oil, one of the brand names is Plenish beans. There's others out there. So there's other besides just the Plenish soybeans, but they actually have an opportunity to be somewhat of a game changer on a dairy farm. So this is a new technology. We haven't had many new technologies that change on the agronomy sides that change the dairy side. So we've had BMR corn, that came about in the 70s and then really came about more so in the early 2000s. And now there's talk of actually sunsetting that technology. So there's even when we do get sometimes a good tool in the toolbox, it gets taken away from us or changed or moved or whatever. So soybeans is one that I saw first showing up on dairy farms when I was a kid in the 90s. I remember my dad's first soybean field. It actually did really well, usually on new ground that's never grown soybeans. they do well. And then actually the yield sort of, I would call it almost stabilize, which is frustrating to most corn soybean growers. But if you bring soybeans onto your dairy farm, there's a good chance you're going to see very good yields to start. With some inputs, obviously, but it shouldn't be too hard to do. One of the things I would warn growers that are trying Plenish soybeans or high oleic soybeans is they're either conventional or Roundup Ready only. They are not typically have, say, all the traits. So if you have a very weedy field that you're used to in list soybeans, that may not be a good fit for you. So make sure the fit is right. The other part can be maturity ranges. So they've got a range of them, but most of them are like 2.0 and higher. So for some dairy producers, it may not work to be able to even grow these on your farm well and get them dry enough. So one of the things you could think about is contacting a neighbor cash cropper and working with that farm to grow these soybeans on their farm, and then buying from them. There will need to be some sort of premium paid because it's a better product for the dairy. So, but that can be worked out pretty well with a cash crop neighbor. So that can be one option. One other option that fits in this rotation well is maybe you purchase more corn silage or alfalfa and use those acres to grow soybeans on your own farm. So that I haven't had many producers try. It's a little bit more, risky because to grow soybeans is pretty easy. We know how to contract, we know the bushels. When you start paying for corn silage, that can be a little bit more difficult. So what I would tell producers out there is to try to talk to neighbors about this, see if it's a good fit. And then the probably the first step actually in this is to talk to your dairy nutritionist. So been seeing more in the news. There's one Brownfield Ag News had in there, basically the headline was the value of high oleic soybeans and dairy nutrition, and it was from recently in March. So I think we're going to see a lot more articles about this on the dairy nutrition side. I don't know that side. I know it helps butter fat. I don't know much more than that. And frankly, I just look forward to the opportunity of what it can do in our rotations and where it fits.
So Todd, can we break, and maybe I'm stealing your thunder here, but can we break that down when we're talking about more of that, again, adding that crop rotation in, if this is maybe some way to mix it up, spice it up a little bit, if you will. From your standpoint, again, we're talking soil and roots down, if you will. Tell us more, like what does this have the potential to do? I mean, obviously there's the obvious and the fact of, breaking it up, disease mitigation, things like that. But what are some other benefits of adding maybe this type or any other type of soybean into your crop mix? What does that do to your microorganisms or just soil in general?
Yeah, what we've seen with soybeans, and I'll be frank with you, when we first brought soybeans on, it actually was, and this is talking to Jeff Polinsky and an agronomist that I used to work with, and he said when soybeans came here in the 80s, it was because of the soil health push that they brought. Now the amount of soybeans we have, I don't know that we necessarily saw that health benefit as much as we thought. However, anytime you're breaking up a continuous corn and then you got a little bit of alfalfa in there with the soybean, it'll help you. So growers out there that are already growing soybeans, they're not gonna get any benefit. But if you have none on your farm, I think you'll see benefit. The other wording that's going away is a soybean credit. So there's now we just call it a rotational credit. So you don't have the penalty of corn on corn when it comes to nitrogen and all that carbon that comes with corn residue. Now corn silage, we don't have that as much, but you'll still have a benefit that first year corn right after soybeans does really well. So one of the things to think about is the yield bump that you're going to get with that first year. And then the different sort of bacteria, the different sort of soil organisms that each crop kind of promotes and does well. That's a big benefit too. The other challenge specifically to soybeans, it's still a bit of a stigma that's true, is putting manure on soybeans. The main reason why that was always looked down upon or not, that we didn't try to do as much, is because we could get white mold or more diseases in soybeans. However, I would say my last year, my best field of soybeans, we had 94 bushels across the whole field. That had dairy manure on it and did extremely well. So one of the things to sort of think about is if yes, again, it can promote certain diseases. However, I would say some of my best yields have had manure in that, and I'm starting to get away from that sort of stigma of what that brings.
Okay.
So the next crop we're going to talk about is winter wheat or wheat in general. For most of our listeners, I think it's going to be winter wheat, where you plant it in the fall and then harvest sort of the next July timing. This one's going to be like the long reliever. So this one, you can put it in there because it grows in the fall and pushes into the spring. So a really, really helpful crop as far as what it can do, especially on soil degradation, because it's growing throughout the fall and in the spring when we need a living root there to help. It works really good planting after corn silage. You can plant it after soybeans as well. Alfalfa, I've had more and more growers actually go um, from alfalfa to winter wheat. And you'd go, well, why would we waste that sort of alfalfa credit on winter wheat? Why not go to corn? And one of the advantages is you can plant it quite early and it can be done in, late August or and usually we don't want to plant wheat late August. So it's almost like early September, but right at say September 15th, when what there's called the Hessian fly free date, we can be planting our winter wheat and have it ready to go. And we're not, worried about corn silage and you got all the harvest things and get manure on. And then to get that crop planted can be hard sometimes. So one of the spots that actually has worked better than I thought is planting winter wheat after alfalfa. Seen very good yields doing that. And you'd say, like I said, it feels like you're wasting that alfalfa credit, but it does work in some rotations where otherwise, if I'm not going to get that fit in there anyway, it's good to add it in. You can feed the straw. Obviously, there's a lot of straw uses on your farm for all kinds of, feeding it, bedding, all kinds of good stuff. And then if it doesn't work out, it's always a cover crop. So one of the parts I've always said with wheat, now it's gotten expensive to do that as a cover crop, but a failure there, it was still a beneficial cover crop. The next crop we're going to talk about is sorghum. There's a lot of different variations of sorghum. There might be dairy producers listening, out of state, say down in Texas or somewhere like that. They grow a lot of sorghum on their dry land. They're going to know a lot more than a Wisconsin agronomist on sorghum, but I do work with enough sorghum. When we treat it right, like a good, like a crop, and as we learn more about it, we're getting good yields on it. Great option for sandy soils or maybe a poor soil. Sorghum does really well. One other fit, I'm doing a lot more sorghum, is taking an alfalfa first cutting in the spring and then going to sorghum. In Wisconsin or in our northern states, we can't usually plant sorghum till July. We want that soil to be 60 degrees. We want it warmed up and really nice and ready to go. So sorghum, like I said, very good option, but it fits in the rotation potentially different. So this one I got called the left-handed specialist. So if you're thinking in a pitcher, you got that one, that left-handed pitcher that can throw, usually against certain batters, those guys are basically unstoppable. And I would say that sorghum is that way too, that a very good fit. And sorghum's a grass similar to corn. When it grows, it looks similar. One of my summer scouts last year actually they didn't even know they were in a sorghum field versus a cornfield. They said, wow, that corn's planted really thick. And then we said, well, no, that's actually sorghum, and so explained it and it was a good teaching moment. But when it's small, when it's, under 6 inches, they look the same. So one of the things you'd think would be that corn after sorghum, you'd see, because they're so similar, you'd see like a yield hit. But we see the opposite. We see corn after sorghum do really well. Just in general, crops after sorghum do well. So there's sort of a synergistic effect with sorghum that it's a really nice rotational crop that way. Sorghum has a good fit. You can feed it to dairy cows. Most of my growers where we're feeding it to heifers. But there's a fit in the dairy rotation for a little bit of it. That one you'll have to ask your nutritionist how it fits. But if you're feeding, one of the ways is if you're feeding a lot of straw or lower quality forage, this has a fit. But I would say I've also got sorghum, if you're growing BMR sorghum, cutting it at the right time, we see it rival, work in a dairy diet just fine. So it's kind of a good crop that has a fit on certain farms.
I can say as a southeastern dairy farmer, we use it for our heifers and our dry cows. It works well. Granted, we use a sorghum Sudan, but still in the same family.
Yeah, thank you, because that's perfect. Is that there's so many variations of sorghum that it blows, you have sorghum Sudan. I guess when a farmer brings it up, I have to be more specific. Like what are we talking about? How are we going to cut it? Some of the sorghums lately have been growing more of our full season sorghums where we let a frost kill it at the end of the year and then harvest it just the same as corn silage.
Yep.
I had one grower last year, they were harvesting in the snow in December. And I was nervous because I'm like, ooh, this is gonna be tough, but it worked fine for them and they really had very little problems. So yeah, sorghum's a very diverse crop that way.
Absolutely. And it always reminds me of our Texas dairy farmers or even the nutritionists that we work from down there. They always scratch their head when we're saying like we're feeding corn silage to our dry cows or our heifers. They're like, why are you wasting that? Use sorghum or things like this and all their creative feed stuff. So this is just ringing in the back of my mind here.
Yeah, and like I said, from agronomist standpoint, a great fit for a lot of things to fit in your rotation for some very low cost forage typically too. So it's good.
So
Next,
plant wise, sorry to kind of squirrel with on you for a moment. When you think of again the soil benefits of this particular crop, is there an added nutrient benefit? Like, is it kind of harvesting something back into the soil when you think of sequestration? Like, what are some of the benefits to the soil that sorghum would bring particularly?
yeah, sorghum is unique in that in a lot of cover crop mixes, we're using somewhat types of sorghum at times. If you have a full enough season to do that, um, it the root structure is different than a soybean. You're more of a taproot. Alfalfa, you're a taproot, and then corn, you get that really kind of it's a uh, bigger, more fibrous root. And sorghum's kind of in that middle where it's not like a grass root, not like a corn root, but similar. And then the amount of plants it seems to anchor and help a lot more. What's odd with sorghum is I don't know, Cassie, that I have a specific thing I've seen it bring, but to harken back to that, it just seems like the next crop benefits from it.
Okay.
Very anecdotal, but I would say it does seem to be a very good way to break up that rotation. When we look at some of the T losses and stuff some of the soil loss equations, sorghum's does really well with that as well, that it just is it holds soil, especially better. We talked about soybeans earlier. That one you got to watch. If you till soybeans too much, you're going to lose soil. So, and corn silage is similar that way, where sorghum, just with the amount of plants that are out there and the amount of roots, does really well.
That's helpful. Thank you.
The next one we'll pivot to is just grass. And this is a huge, no, sorghum was that way. Grass is even more so. I mean, you can be talking tall fescues, fistoliums, meadow fescues, teff grass. I mean, we being Midwest agronomists, I would say, are learning more how to grow this versus our, especially in Europe, counterparts. They don't grow alfalfa there. They grow all grass. So to them, again, this would seem somewhat silly, but grass forage, we're learning more. We're learning the nitrogen need on it is very high. As we do more studies with the university on this, we're seeing that each cutting needs quite a bit of nitrogen to get it going, to get good yields, and that plant is taking it up because it's, as you're doing cuttings, it's cycling that so much faster. It is a good place for summer manure. I would say an excellent place. So if you have a dairy farm that it's nice to relieve your manure pits, or you don't have maybe as much manure storage, this is a great option because you can be hauling in June, July, or August when your corn silage is growing and does very little damage. We also top dress a lot in alfalfa fields, but that doesn't take the traffic as well as what as what grass will. So really good product with that. Another newer thing that's helped is what's called stream bars.
Mhm.
So to put nitrogen on, you can use these stream bars on your sprayer and put a lower rate of nitrogen right there, and it's right active for that. So that's helpful. But what this crop does is, I mean, extremely fibrous root. When I'm talking soil loss, grass is going to be your least amount soil loss. I mean, it is the bottom. It is a go anywhere product. It can do a lot of things that are beneficial that way. So really high, really can get really good digestibility out of grasses if you cut frequently. And I think I spoke earlier to the potential that we're losing the BMR product on some farms, and that's going to be a tricky part. And this would be a spot where maybe you could bring in grass into your rotation and cut it very quickly and get a very good digestible product from it. But as far as this one, I mean, think of we call it sod for a reason, and sod busting is that back in the day, sod, CRP ground, sod, that was our best soil benefiter. Pasture ground, was always good. So um, I don't think there's any questioning this one as far as like what it does for the soil. We know it's very good, and that fibrous root is excellent. So that leads me to my next idea is to
Okay.
is to adding grass in with your alfalfa. So if you have a pure alfalfa stand, is maybe adding grass with it. And the pitching analogy here would be a setup man. So maybe you have a pitcher that just comes in and just you only need a little bit, but it helps a lot, sets you up for a better rotation. In Wisconsin, we use the Snap Plus software to help us meet T, which is tolerable soil loss. And it always amazes me when I have an alfalfa field and I'll have it in there and then we'll add grass to it and I'll put it in this calculator and we'll drop the soil loss by a ton a year at times. And this is an alfalfa crop that it's a perennial out there. You think of alfalfa as being very beneficial to the soil, which it is. However, older alfalfa stands, most of our producers see it, we'll get those gaps
Mhm.
in where there's plants. So you might have 4 plants per sort of square foot. That's still a sufficient amount to keep. But there's a lot of bare soil you'll still see when you have that. So it's protected, but when I have that combo of grass with it, they complement each other well. A couple of things with this where I do have difficulties is there's times where you either get too much alfalfa and not enough grass, or too much grass and not enough alfalfa. And that depends on the year. It depends on how much. Typically, we're doing 2 pounds to 8 pounds in a mix. When we first started doing these mixes, we were doing like 10 pounds of grass and 10 pounds of alfalfa, and it was too much grass. So now we bumped that back up to sort of 14 to 18 pounds of alfalfa, and then probably normal is about 2 to 5 pounds of grass. And just having really, really good soil benefits with that. So even some of the NRCS and some of the governmental programs and payments, they're looking at this too and just saying, are you just putting alfalfa with your grass, and you potentially could get a payment for that. So that's something to be aware of, that they are seeing this very good benefit to having the grass with it, and it's a good setup for that. So really easy one too. I like this is not gonna you can still plant your corn, soybean, alfalfa on your same rotation. Really easy. I do get the question of where and when and how do I plant the grass. So we've done it many ways. So if you have a drill that you can plant both at the same time, put the grass in the big box of the drill and then the alfalfa box. But more and more guys are going to air drills or different type of drills where we can't sort of plant them at the same time as easily. So I had some growers would plant the alfalfa, then come back immediately and plant the grass. That's you're basically doing twice over the fields. It's a little more work. What we've been changing to over time is planting this grass in the fall. So you plant the alfalfa, especially if it's Roundup ready alfalfa, plant the alfalfa, spray with Roundup, get it clean, and then you actually plant the grass in August sometime. So kind of that little bit of different way of thinking about. There's a lot of ways to try to do it, but that's one of them that can work. So that's our setup man. And then to go to the closer, so this is kind of the one that, so when you bring in your closer, your pitcher, that you want this guy, to be lights out. He's got to be intimidating. He's usually got to pitch pretty fast. And usually you want him to go three batters and he's out. And that's where rye and triticale and that can fit and be a closer for you. Be something that in the fall that you plant after your corn silage harvest, you can plant it. If you have wheat or soybeans, it works well after that too. And in a dairy rotation, it works great for forage. It's a really good way to get some forage in the springtime. So let's just talk forage specifically. Is the when you have it'll ease storage space. So if on your farm you're tight on forage storage, this is a way that we're putting it on that pile in May or June when usually your corn silage pile is fairly empty, and maybe you can kind of have that in tandem with that. And it works well with that. So it's a good way to ease storage space, or we're harvesting it first before any of these other products, and it works well for that. And then what is nice, you can go back to corn silage right after it. So it's a way to add a crop to a rotation without changing much of the rotation. So you can still do, say, your 4 years of alfalfa and then plant it to corn. And then after that year of corn, go to rye and then maybe go back to corn. It doesn't technically break up the rotation, but it's a way to help. And when we're talking about this is going to add to the soil, when we add a living root in the fall and in the spring, we see a bunch of biological benefits that we're just bringing life, oxygen down into that soil, and kind of help it with all those microbes live and keep living throughout the year and have a food source for a lot of those microbes to have. So this is a good one. And one other spot that fits here is if it's just a cover crop. So there might be times where you do want to plant it as a forage crop, but just as a cover crop, two of these work great, is planting barley, oats, triticale, or rye for a cover crop after your corn silage. And one of the things we've seen change, I got one producer that's working really well. Right after they harvest corn, they're immediately, it's his dad actually gets out the drill, plants, just keeps planting the cover crop. And then they've got a low disturbance manure machine, or even their higher disturbance manure with like a disc on it. It's a higher disturbance, but over the top of that cover crop and maybe disturb it a little, but the cover crop still grows through it. So we're able to kind of that nice growth right away. You get the manure on it, and that really gets that cover crop growing. And even with the little disturbance, it doesn't affect that cover crop at all. So, and it's a good way to maybe break up any compaction or problems you did have without doing too much tillage. So this is our closer. I think this is one that is we hear about cover crop all the time. So this isn't maybe under publicized, but it's maybe a little underutilized yet on certain farms where there's a fit for it. One of the other things we're doing a lot more with cover crop is terminating in the spring earlier. So as we're getting into spring now, this is a good time to think about it, is as that cover crop gets taller, there's benefits, but there also can be problems if you get over 8 to 12-inch cover crop. It changes the vegetative growth into more reproductive. It's more carbon based. It turns more to that straw that we're talking about with winter wheat. So we're having certain farms where, and I talked about this last fall on the Dairy Signals, have a strategy this spring of termination of your cover crop. So this would be a good time because we're talking in spring here. Talk to your agronomist and tell them at 8 inches I want to terminate, or kind of have that ready. And then basically all we got to watch for is when it hits that certain height and we can pull that trigger on that cover crop. So Cassie, any those are kind of my, if I had to put a team together of where we could fit another one in a rotation that would help, of those are the group that we could sort of pull from.
No, I think that definitely hit home, and I appreciate you kind of talking again to that soil benefits of, what does this mean for the full circle, full story here, which I think is a nice way. And maybe I'm jumping the gun and getting a little oddly excited when we talk about, okay, what are some of, especially tis this season, when we think about like those early season pests and disease and like mitigating risk. You just talked about, watching your cover crops, what's coming up, but also be ready to trigger that plan when it gets to that that certain growth. So
Yeah.
what are some other things this coming spring or now that we're in it that we
Right.
need to be watching and mindful of?
Right. The couple, so let me just put it one more to put this to bed here on the rotation part, and then we'll get to that. So,
Absolutely. I told you I
no,
got a little excited.
yeah,
That's
no, and that would have been a great segue. So I apologize for messing that up. To finish out the rotation on this, to think about, is pitching that perfect game or the perfect crop rotation. And that perfect crop rotation is if we can get less corn on corn is really in the dairy side. So one of the downsides with alfalfa is it's a perennial. So it's out there for 4 years. And
if you're
then
lucky.
right, if you're like, right. So hopefully 4 years or something. Yeah, lately it feels like it's only been three. I've had stands last 6 years, and then it feels like it's there forever. And then the complement is corn silage. So then you got 4 years in a row of alfalfa, and then you got 4 years in a row of corn silage. And that in our rotation is probably one of the biggest problems in a dairy rotation. So I had one farm this year. I was so excited that uh, a dairy farm, and we were able to get a full rotation with no corn on corn at all. And this was like 2,000 plus acres of corn. So it was a bigger farm that, so the rotation was 43% corn, 15% alfalfa, 6% new seeding, 8% winter wheat, 22% soybeans, and 7% sorghum. So that was real quick, and the numbers don't matter. What matters is getting corn was 43%, and then kind of those other non-perennial crops are also 43%. So my new seeding, winter wheat, soybeans, and sorghum was 43% of the rotation. And so basically those in tandem, I just flip everything and it works really well. And like I said, I've been gearing up on this farm to do that for like the last 5 years. And this is the first year we were able to succeed at that. And now going forward, the way we've got the rotation set up is basically 6% of the alfalfa comes out, goes to corn. All the crops go from whatever they were to corn. And then we kind of flip the corn to, like I said, one of these other products. And what we should see with that, a lot of soil benefits, because you're constantly getting those different bugs in that, in that soil over time. So we're really hoping that that's a good way. This farm also uses a lot of cover crop in there. So that's just the harvested crops. That's not even counting after winter wheat. They do a very diverse cover crop. So really excited to see how something like that's gonna work and gonna do it. It's not gonna fit on every farm. I understand that. And again, to going back to the ask is just how can you get one more crop on your farm and you're gonna I should back up. You may not see the benefits because they're all underground, but there will be benefits there. So
It might just take time for you to physically see them.
you're right. Correct. It takes time. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the part that does take time. And then to hit it home until we do that hard pivot, just less tillage. So we talk a lot about crop rotation. One of the spots that I see benefiting farms is just less tillage going to no till or strip till. No till or strip till doesn't fit for everybody. So what I like to say is just prescribe tillage. So if you need tillage, then do it and be okay with it. And as we're using more cover crops, we're seeing that tandem with a little bit of tillage can work really well. So just trying to find ways, you're burning less fuel, which is good. You're 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 saving that soil from eroding, and then you're ejecting less oxygen in that soil, which helps kind of hold that soil a lot better. So
Definitely. Farming, I feel, is a lot like parenting. It doesn't come with the perfect manual. You have to trial and error it. So
that's
hopefully, to your point, hopefully there's less error, but you still have to try it to figure out what works for you.
yep. And I thank you for that. That's a perfect analogy of parenting, because it is like that of you're you're putting something young out there and letting the world do whatever to it. And a lot of times it doesn't end well. Most of the time, hopefully it does. So yeah, it's just what you try as a parent and as a farmer. So let's pivot into, what to look for this year. So, was a unique, every year is unique. And every year with that unique winter, with the unique spring we get, last year felt especially unique. In most of the Midwest, we had kind of a very dry spring. Last year at this time, it was extremely dry. And then it got really wet, and then it got dry again. And as they look, through how this winter was, we did have a very cold spell through the Midwest, which is good. And in parts of, as listeners down in Texas, I mean, different areas got snow that didn't maybe have snow before. And kind of areas too in Wisconsin, we had snow and then didn't. So just a unique year. We should have killed a lot of bugs and broke up diseases with how deep the frost got and how cold we got. So that's really exciting. And there is a little bit of a drought out there, and we'll get to that in a second. So one of the things to think about is early season is they're very regional. So something that affects you might not even affect your neighbor. That bodies of water greatly affected. So growers that are by, bigger lakes like Lake Michigan, they see stuff way different than other farmers that aren't near big lakes or bodies of water. So body of water affected. And then winter is a great reset button. So depending how deep your frost did get, can change that. And then a lot of our early season pests actually come up from the south, say in Mexico or Texas, and work their way north. So, and as those moths fly, they might see something that for some reason they choose that spot to lay their eggs or decide that they want to camp out. So that can be very regional too. So as we're talking about this, farmers might say, well, like, I've never dealt with that pest, or it's never been a problem. It doesn't mean you won't have it this year. And like I said, most years you should be fine, but you might get something that hurts you. Talking drought, some of the articles been out, it says, 60% of the farmland is at risk forecasted for drought. But when you look at the drought monitor that they've released, it's odd out there that there's a lot of areas that, is the moisture's adequate. And then there's enough areas that are in drought. So that's might change, basically what pests you have, what problems you have, and it's something to watch. But also it's unique because right now, and on the drought map, you can kind of see it. But when you get into the kind of the southern US, that they're having more actually problems with flooding. So like earlier this week, there was that Buffalo Trace distillery had flooding, and that the whole distillery is underwater. So there was we've got this very divergent, US map here. We got areas that are flooded and we got areas that are in severe drought, which is pretty normal. That's always the case that, somebody's kind of getting deluged with rain and somebody's not getting enough. But that's going to change some of the pests that we got to watch out for. One of the one I want guys to watch is called black cutworm. And this pest, and the IPM website says it best. It says, what this pest lacks in numbers, it makes up for in occurrences. So it's odd with this one is I'll have farms that we don't see it at all or have a problem. And then I'll get farms where we got to either spray for it or replant because of the damage it does. So black cutworm will cut corn off at the base of the plant. And basically it kills the corn because it's right at the growing point. So we'll watch for moth counts here this spring. The last 2 years, actually, Wisconsin, we've seen the highest moth counts in a long time. So like we've got traps set up. There's other states that do a trapping network. So just look up your trapping network or have your agronomist look that up so you know what to expect. So usually this one we could kind of tell when to be watching for it when these traps kind of start to explode. So last year in the Midwest, we saw kind of in April, kind of late April, early May, the traps counts really explode, especially in like southern Wisconsin. So they're shown here in this orange as they're getting more and more. So something to be aware of, watch out for. And it probably only affects of like even the cornfields I look at like 1% a year. But then again, where it affects them, it really affects them. So kind of an odd one that's something out there to keep watching for.
So you're saying like last year, obviously it was an issue. This last year with certain areas, I know in our area, and maybe this is a fishtail from my husband, but he was saying we had about 11 feet of frost. Like
11
that's
feet.
our
Yeah.
amount of,
Holy.
yeah, right. I think this might be a fishtail, but he was pretty excited about the amount of frost that we had this year. Would that have any benefit to kind of cutting back or mitigating this, or what does
Right.
this bug thrive off of? Like
Yeah,
what's
that's a good
helping it thrive?
question. That's a great question, Cassie, because each of these bugs are very unique and very different. And 11 feet of frost, a lot of our late season bugs, I think, is going to actually take care of. But most of our early season pests, this one included black cutworm, is a moth that comes up from Texas and flies off. So you won't see any change in this one because of our deep frost or anything like that. So we'll see what the trap counts show, because certain years, if it was really cold where they overwintered towards the south, that might have taken care of them a little bit. But this is one that you may not be affected by that. The next one we talk about, alfalfa weevil, that one probably will be affected by the frost, and we may not have as much, damage from it. Here's another one's very regional. I got certain alfalfa growers that never seem to have a problem, and other ones where you have it. It'll be kind of this feeding on the margins of the leaves or leaves. And what you want to look at is if 40% of your alfalfa stems have feeding. So it's not 40% feeding damage, it's 40% of stems with feeding. So it's kind of tricky. So if you see one stem with damage, you kind of pick out an area, count to 100 stems, and if 40 of those have feeding out of the 100, you're at threshold to spray for this pest. And usually they emerge in May. We need 300 growing degree days for them to kind of emerge. And then they feed for 20 days. So a couple of times where it could be tricky is if they come in at the end of first cutting, you'll cut all that alfalfa, put it into a windrow, and then those bugs can shake to the bottom of that windrow and feed in that spot. And you might have really slow regrowth, and you wonder why. Well, it could be from this bug. So here's another one that is how regional they are and how often, like black cutworm, I only had to spray probably only had to spray only a couple times in the last 5 years. I had to replant probably 1 or 2 fields a year based on that. And then alfalfa weevil, I actually haven't had to spray for alfalfa weevil at all in the last 5 years, but before that we sprayed, here and there. So very regional, depending on the year. And the next thing to talk about is alfalfa diseases. So a lot of our dairy farms out there grow alfalfa, and spring is the best time to apply fungicides. So if you're thinking about a fungicide, don't wait till second crop, third crop. Like you don't get as much bang for your buck. Do it earlier season, especially if we have a cool and wet spring, which it feels like we're on the track to have. You don't always know that, but feels like it's going to be fairly cool and wet. Then fungicide pays a lot more. And basically the research shows that on average, applying on first crop alfalfa provides a higher yield response. So again, this would be the time to be thinking about applying it, watching for just different leptoleaf spot and other diseases that can be a big problem. And the goal here is to increase quality by keeping lower leaves as well. So you might increase tonnage, and then hopefully you'll increase quality by holding on to those bottom leaves at the end of that cutting. So I got more guys asking about fungicide and alfalfa, and it's a tricky one to scout for because by the time the disease is there, usually we're too late to apply. So insects are great to scout for. In general, weeds are. Diseases are tougher to scout for because most of our fungicides are protectants, and so they more so prevent some of this from happening. So watching the weather, watching what we normally get diseases on is something to watch for.
So follow-up question to that, as we were talking earlier about kind of adding some of those grasses into your alfalfa stands, theoretically, if you have a more established alfalfa stand, would it be beneficial to add that grass in? Could it help with some of the fungus or some of those other areas because it theoretically would fill more of that in, or is that going to create more of an issue if you already have some of these problems?
Typically, I've seen it help. More instances than not, I've seen it help. There's been times where I've seen it bring in rusts. There's some rust diseases that like certain grasses, but then they would just affect those grasses usually within that stand. So no, in general, having that little bit more diverse mix helps you. And then say you do have a disease, like leptoleaf. And when we're talking alfalfa, spring is obviously the best time to assess alfalfa. So we could have assessed it in the fall, but whatever happened there is anybody's game to how that looks now. So I like getting out of alfalfa fields, now seeing how they woke up. So seeing how they're coming out of dormancy, seeing the strength of that root, seeing what it's doing to sort of wake up, and obviously just check if they're healthy and going to live. So first thing we'll do is take plant counts. We want at least 4 plants in a square foot. And then we'll take stem counts when they get a little taller. And there we want closer to 50 stems at least, but I've kept stands that are 40 stems or even 30, depending on the year and the reason. Overall this year, I would say the alfalfa looks okay out there. I don't think we're gonna have sort of a widespread winter kill event. We can still have winter kill in late March and early April, where as it's waking up, it kind of has that problem where it gets woken up and then we get too cold for it. One nice part is it's been a fairly cool or gradual spring. So we don't have that effect. We talked about kids and family earlier is like when you have to wake up kids really early, say you're going on a trip or they run a long Easter break like my kids were. And then, right, right. They're on, and now they got to wake up at 6 in the morning. You got to like kind of really get them going. And alfalfa luckily hasn't had that wake up where it's just shocked. It's slowly waking up and it's kind of been able to, what I call them, sleep in a little bit. And that's can be an okay thing where it'll be this gradual warm up. So, but as we get warmer here, we need it to warm up nicely, and then these plants will get off and going. So, just keep an eye on those stands. It's still too early to know how they'll do and what they'll do this year, but that they're overall so far we're still looking okay.
Sounds good. As we wrap up today, Todd, first off and foremost, thank you for your time. Thank you for helping us dial it in as we get excited for spring. I know many have been tuning up the tractors and just getting that itch because the sun is just shining ever so brighter. And just changes in the air in all the right ways right now. So with that in mind, as we wrap up today's element here today, what would be 2 key takeaways, regardless if it's from the first section when we were talking about kind of that crop rotation, or even in the later part where we talked more about the pest mitigation or what to be aware of in this early part of the spring? What would be 2 key takeaways that they can either keep in mind for this week, or as we continue to march on with our business and our operations this spring, what should we be aware of?
Yeah, let's start. Spring is an exciting time for farmers. As we talk, baseball's starting again. That's always a lot of fun. And we're talking rotations. So like I said, if we use the analogy today of pitching rotation, think about where in your crop rotation, and you may not do something this spring, but when you're sitting in that tractor and you got a lot of time to think, or in the barn and in the parlor, and you're listening to this and you have time to think of how I can add one more crop. We talked to some about, where specifically how those crops can help, but the bigger picture for the farmer is just any added crop will help. So if you have a 2 crop rotation, go to a 3 crop. If you have a 3 crop, go to a 4 crop, and just getting that other added species in the mix is going to help your soil and help that biology of the soil. So please think about that. And then as we come into spring, think about all these, insects or problems out in the field are very regional. So even when we're talking alfalfa winter kill, I think out of that list I gave is probably the biggest worry on most of our minds, rather than getting some sort of bug or disease. Is it alive? So checking these fields as they wake up, and then making sure you understand, regionally maybe where you had a problem or didn't, and be mindful of that and be excited. I'm excited for this year. I'll be honest, last year was rough for most of my growers. Dairy wise, it was good, but it was a tough year, Cassie. So anytime we could come into a new year excited, refreshed, it always has that feel of that way when we get into spring here. So it should be off into a really good 2025.
Agreed. It's just that spring, the rainbows and roses are still in our eyes right now. The reality is going to hit pretty soon, or the not doom and gloom, but just the functionality of operating and owning a dairy farm, and even for our cropping partners that we align so well with. But thank you again. Thank you for dialing in it with us today as we got into all things as crop rotations and safeguarding our soil. So thank you for your time, Todd. We greatly appreciate that. And while I'm handing out the thank you so that it doesn't seem like it's a forgotten thing, because it's certainly not. Again, a special thank you to our national sponsors, our partners that align so closely, not with only PDPW, but also our listeners, our fellow dairymen, and again, our crop people that are tuning in as well. Thank you. Thank you for making this possible. Again, I had mentioned in the beginning that this is our 5th year. And this was actually the week in which it started. So if you want a little bit of a flashback, here it is for you. All things great and glorious and in between. So thank you for tuning in today. And hopefully we see you again tomorrow on the Dairy Signal. Take care, everybody.